I was 10 days away from marrying the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. The venue was paid for. The guests were arriving. The dress was ready. Then I forgot my coat at my future mother-in-law's house. So I went back. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't looking for secrets. But before I could grab my coat, I heard my fiancé laughing. Then I heard the words that stopped me cold. She's not the woman I love. She's the smartest choice. Everyone in the room laughed. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't walking into a marriage. I was walking into a transaction. My name is Natalie Carter, and I was 31 years old when a forgotten coat saved me from the biggest mistake of my life. 10 days before my wedding, I drove to my future mother-in-law Linda's house carrying a folder full of seating charts, vendor confirmations, and last-minute wedding details. I was excited, not nervous, not uncertain, just excited. Ethan and I had been together for 3 years, and despite the normal ups and downs that every couple experiences, I genuinely believed we were building a future together. Linda had invited a few relatives over that afternoon to discuss wedding logistics. Nothing unusual. The house was busy when I arrived. Family members moved between the kitchen and living room while Linda proudly showed everyone photos of the venue. For nearly an hour, we talked about table arrangements, catering choices, and travel plans for out-of-town guests. Everything seemed normal. When I finally left, several people were still chatting in the living room. I said my goodbyes, walked outside, and started toward my car. That's when I realized my coat wasn't with me. I stopped. The weather was chilly, and I remembered leaving it on a chair near the hallway. Annoyed at myself, I turned around and headed back. The front door was still slightly open. I stepped inside quietly. Then I heard Ethan's voice. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I wasn't hiding. But the moment I heard my name, I froze. "You act like I'm making a mistake," Ethan said with a laugh. Someone chuckled. Then Linda replied, "No one's saying it's a mistake. We're saying it's a smart decision." The room erupted with quiet agreement. I stayed perfectly still. Ethan laughed again. "Exactly. Natalie is dependable. Stable job. No drama. She's organized. Honestly, she's the safest choice I could make." Safe choice. Not the love of his life. Not his best friend. Not the woman he couldn't wait to marry. The safest choice. Another relative spoke up. "She's going to make your life easy." "That's the idea," Ethan replied. More laughter followed. My stomach tightened. Then Linda added something I'll never forget. "Love fades. Stability doesn't. You're thinking long-term, and that's what matters." Nobody disagreed. Nobody mentioned happiness. Nobody mentioned love. They spoke about me like I was a business investment, a practical decision, a useful asset. I stood there listening as the man I planned to marry discussed our future, like a financial strategy. A few minutes later, I quietly backed toward the door before anyone could see me. Then I walked to my car. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But one thing was already clear. Before I made any decision, I needed to know whether what I'd heard was the whole truth. I didn't confront Ethan. Not that night. Not the next day. A large part of me wanted to storm into his apartment and demand an explanation. Another part hoped there was one. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe the conversation had been taken out of context. Maybe there was something I wasn't seeing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed facts, not emotions. So I paid attention. For the first time in 3 years, I stopped looking at Ethan through the eyes of someone in love and started looking at him objectively. The differences were immediate. I noticed how often he avoided conversations about our future beyond practical matters. Whenever I talked about dreams, family traditions, or experiences we wanted to share, he redirected the discussion toward budgets, schedules, or financial planning. At the time, I had viewed it as maturity. Now I wasn't so sure. One evening, while helping him organize documents for our honeymoon, I noticed messages appearing on his tablet. I wasn't searching for anything. The screen simply lit up beside me. One message from a friend caught my attention. "Looks like everything's falling into place." Ethan replied almost immediately. "Finally, stability matters more than chemistry." My chest tightened. A few minutes later, another message appeared. You're lucky. Most people don't find someone who checks every box. Ethan answered.
Exactly.
She's reliable. That's what matters. Reliable, stable, safe. The same words I'd heard at Linda's house. Days passed and the pattern continued. Every conversation about our relationship sounded more like a partnership agreement than a marriage. Then I decided to ask him directly. A few nights before the wedding, we were having dinner when I casually said, "What made you know I was the person you wanted to marry?" He smiled. For a second, I hoped for an answer that would erase all my doubts. Instead, he shrugged. Honestly, life with you makes sense. That was it. Not because he loved me. Not because he couldn't imagine losing me. Just because it made sense. In that moment, something inside me quietly broke. I finally understood what I'd been hearing all along. Ethan wasn't marrying me because of who I was. He was marrying me because of what I represented.
Security, predictability,
Convenience. The wedding was only days away.
guests were arriving.
The venue was paid for. Everyone expected me to walk down the aisle. I smiled through every remaining wedding event and acted like nothing had changed. But privately, I had already made my decision. I just hadn't told anyone yet. The morning of the wedding arrived with bright sunshine and smiling faces. Everyone seemed happy. The venue looked beautiful. Fresh flowers lined the aisle. Guests filled the seats, and soft music played throughout the reception hall. To everyone else, it was the beginning of a perfect day. To me, it was the end of an illusion. As I sat in the bridal suite, I felt surprisingly calm. There were no tears, no panic, no dramatic breakdown, just certainty. For days, I had replayed everything I'd heard and everything I'd learned. The conversation at Linda's house, the messages, the answers Ethan had given when I asked about our future. None of it pointed toward love. It pointed toward convenience. And I refused to build a marriage on that foundation. About 30 minutes before the ceremony, I asked someone to bring Ethan to a private meeting room. When he walked in, he smiled. "You look beautiful," he said. I nodded. Then I closed the door. "Ethan, before we go out there, I need to ask one final question." His smile faded slightly. "Okay. Do you love me, or do I simply make your life easier?" For a moment, he looked confused, then uncomfortable. "Natalie, what kind of question is that?" "The kind that deserves an honest answer." He sighed. "Why are we doing this now?" Because he still wasn't answering. I looked directly at him. "I heard the conversation at your mother's house." His face immediately changed. The confidence disappeared. I continued. "I heard what you said about me being the safe choice, the practical choice." "Natalie, that's not what I meant." "Then tell me what you meant." He struggled to respond. The silence gave me everything I needed. A few minutes later, Linda entered the room after realizing something was wrong. She immediately started explaining. "You misunderstood. We were talking about stability." "Exactly," I said quietly. "That's the problem." I looked at both of them. Not once did either of you talk about love. You talked about benefits, convenience, security. Neither of them had an answer. I took a deep breath. Then I said the words that changed everything. "The wedding isn't happening." Shock filled the room. But for the first time in weeks, I felt completely at peace. Several months later, I realized something important. Calling off the wedding wasn't the hardest decision of my life. Walking into a marriage where I wasn't truly valued would have been. Sometimes people think heartbreak comes from losing the wrong person. In reality, heartbreak comes from staying with them. And if I had never gone back for that forgotten coat, I might have learned that lesson far too late.